Greetings, fellow travelers, and welcome to the Way of the Showman, where we view the world through the lens of showmanship. I am Captain Frodo, and I will be your host and guide along the way. And today we are back into the second part of the conversation held at the fantastic place, Den Fantastiska Platsen, at the art studio from Ivar, with Ivar and Ivar Hackscher and Erik Åberg and Gilligan and myself, where we, in this part of the conversation, we dig even deeper into education. And as I was writing the notes to sketch out what this conversation is about, for those of you who want to go back at another time and look in the show notes and see what topics were covered, if there was some idea that you thought was interesting, that I hope that these show notes just give you just enough of a sort of a guide of what was talked about, so you can find your way around in the episode if you get back to it at another point. But as we started to talk about education, and it sort of struck me that over the last few episodes where we've talked to Matt King and we've talked to a lot of performers over this last few months, and I thought, okay, we're back into this thing of talking of education, which I am very interested in. I'm interested in education because I am permanently in a state of educating myself, of all these conversations that we have. And one of the reasons why the Way of the Showman actually exists is so that we can further our own education in broadening our minds and in getting perspectives and getting ideas into ourselves that can help us expand our understanding of who we are as people and who we are as performers. And although we are specifically here talking about a circus school, the three interlocutors that I have with me, Ivar, Erik and Jay, all are in one way or another connected to the circus school in Stockholm. And although that is what we're talking about, in the way that I've talked about in previous episodes of my secret way of actively reading, which is actively trying to connect myself to the material, I have been thinking that the kind of school that they talk about is a sort of abstract school that I am going through in my life. So although we are talking about a teacher-student relationship, I'm always then seeing myself flipping between those two poles, because sometimes I see myself as the teacher. How do I express this to someone? And sometimes as the pupil, how do I learn and how do I get the most out of this conversation that I listen to? So in a sense, this student-teacher relationship is always in my mind when I'm listening to this conversation, and when I'm adding to it, it is with it in mind that I am the one that's wanting to learn, but also because I am a performer, and because, as we've spoken about many times on this podcast, a showman is someone who faces the other way, and we're facing the other way to a group of people, or potentially even just one person, but in a kind of relationship where one is giving more and one is receiving more. And that relationship is what we're talking about in this episode. Like, some of the thoughts that come out are views on over the last 10-15 years of being involved in this school, where Jay and Erik and Ivar then sees a change in the relationship between the student and the teacher, where the student is arriving at the school with a different attitude towards the education, that the education is something that is coming from the teacher and that's coming from the school, and they're just there being clay in their hands, whilst in the past there has been a slightly different expectation, which we will look at more and as this episode goes. But if you're thinking that you're not interested in circus schools or in a school that could teach you magic or could teach you whatever, then keep it in mind that the one that is being educated always throughout life as you encounter it is yourself. and that the education that we're talking about here, although they're talking about specific students or specific situations, they're always talking about your own self-education. So taking some of the last words that Ivar says here of how he, as a teacher, needs to, as his job is to listen so carefully to the students that he can assist them in coming into their own, or listen in a way so that he will aid them into becoming their own future. That is your task when you're listening on at the conversation today. Keep it in mind that they're always talking about you, and that your role and your task in listening to this conversation is to imagine how you can learn and how you can then listen to yourself to discover what your path will be as you go into the future. And with all that said, let's just jump straight into this second part of this wonderful conversation, and let's join them and myself in the world of ideas.
I mean, Erik and I have been talking about what would be a good education for jugglers, just as a general concept. And of course, at one point, it really was to narrow it down and acknowledge and say, we don't have the resources to just be open-ended to any person. So maybe we should just say, hey, if you come to our school, you're going to learn, you're going to narrow it down, X, Y, and Z, a 5-minute act that's going to work in the German varieties, right? That's part of the discussion, instead of pretending and saying like, well, anything's possible, we can help solve everybody's, whatever you want to do, it's all open, which is kind of the narrative at the circus school right now. I think there is, in the best of ways, I don't mean that in a cynical way, but like, you are encouraged to have your own thoughts of what you want to do, and you are in theory and mostly in practice supported in that idea. But just to recognize it is open-ended in terms of like, they'll take students to the school potentially who do disciplines where there's nobody in the school who does that discipline in terms of coaches or teachers. Well, that's a pretty ambitious step from the school then to provide support for that student. And of course, there was famously a couple, like a Diabloist who came to the school, and there was the conversation before he came and said, hey, well, there's no Diablo coach here. And he said very clearly, good, that's what I want, is I don't want to have Diablo, I can take care of that. Let me get some other input here and there. And in terms of that, Erik, what you were saying about this transmission from one to the other, I often think about it as the one-way street teaching method, right? It's just going from teacher to student. It's a one-way street. It's not a dialogue. Mm-hmm. And I always had this idea that, especially, I don't know why, maybe Ivar can know about this, but like why in more recent years, the students give up more and more autonomy, and they give more and more responsibility up to the institution to take care of their lives. They're more and more passive in that way. Just to recognize that when I first started teaching, I would show up to the circus hall and the students will have been juggling for 2 hours already. It was intimidating to walk to class every morning and be like, wow, I better not waste these people's times. They've taken this really seriously. Whereas in more recent years, you come in the room, they're sitting on the floor, and it's past the time for class to start, and they're waiting for you to tell them to stand up. We're going to start now. That's a whole little different dynamic there. But I always had this idea that even though I'm older than you and I have more experience than you, that's my value, is my greater experience than you. But you're younger than me, and you take the battles for granted that I fought. You are standing on my shoulders and I'm standing on whoever else's shoulders of giants kind of idea. So I had to go through the process of being like, wait, what's site swap? Is that a thing? Should I care about site swap or whatever in juggling? And a new juggler can just come in and be like, oh, site swap's a thing. It's established. I don't need to waste energy on that battle. Yeah. So they're farther ahead of me in terms of the mental process. I have more experience than them. I always look at it like this. We both have the equal opportunity to have a good idea in the moment. Just because I have more experience doesn't negate the possibility that you can just pop something out that's great because you're farther ahead than me in the process. And so I have a question for you, Ivar, which is, I asked you this a couple years ago, and I still struggle with the answer, which is, I was telling Frodo yesterday that I feel sometimes as a teacher, because the students are looking for you to give them the right answer that they can just plug and play. Like, Erik, tell me the thing that I can do that will work. There's the one way, and you have to tell me the secret now.
How do you find the genre of good always?
Yeah. And so I was saying to Frodo, I feel like I have things to share to the students that they should hear. They're like lessons that I learned in my life. But they're not ready to hear those lessons yet. Like, I can tell them literally the words out of my mouth, but they have no relationship to those words in terms of experience. And I asked you last year or the year before, and I said, Ivar, what am I going to do? I feel I have these things I feel compelled to say to them to help them so they don't have to go through the same struggles and battles. But of course, they have to find out those lessons for themselves, this kind of coming of age thing in anybody's life or whatever. And you told me, well, you definitely can't make them hear what you're saying now if they're not ready. Rather, you have to plant the seeds in them so that in the future they develop into being able to hear those things that they should hear. And for the life of me, I just can't wrap my head around that process of like reverse engineering, because I don't think I am naturally a teacher or a coach in that way, but I think you are. So and it goes back to seeing the student who they really are, which we were talking about before, right? You really see the individual.
The general thing, I think, for teachers is you can't teach something which is not asked for. You can't tell anyone anything that they don't want to hear. If their questions are not there, your answers do not serve. So, bad for you.
Yeah.
Kind of. But you can absolutely say to a student, I've got a lot of stuff that I think is important, but I don't know how to get it to you, because I don't know if you have the questions for these answers that I have. And then maybe there is a dialogue coming up from that. I don't know, but it is the same as I don't come tomorrow if you don't have any questions. It is that. And so much of this dialogue is an intuition thing. The John Lee Hooker story. The John Lee Hooker story is, I come with a class of all of kids, 6th grade, to Stockholm from Järna to listen to John Lee Hooker in his old age. I mean, he was almost 80 at that time, so it was the last chance, kind of. And I come into the local and we sit down, and in comes 4 or 5 young guys, all established with electric and bass and all the stuff and percussion, and Mr. Hooker, who sits down on a chair, and they start the most wonderful rock and roll circus, kind of. Great, absolutely great, but it's not the blues, which I wanted him to show kids. So in the break, I run down to the stage, but he disappears through a door, and the lead guitarist comes up like this in front of me, 25-year-old he is, and said, what do you want? And I mean, I came with all these kids from 50 kilometers away to hear Mr. Hooker play the blues. And why the heck do you think we have been playing with him for 3 years? And you know what he says? He says, I can only play what the audience has in their legs. And I think it was true. I think it was true. He was an intuitive guy. And he could sense what the audience wanted. And he couldn't give them anything but what they wanted. And bad for him that he wanted to play the blues, but he couldn't because it was no ears for the blues around. And bad for you. I mean, it's really sad if they don't want, because I know that what you have to give is great and important,
I mean, in the end, bad for me, but bad for the student is more
as
the
well,
problem.
yeah.
But
Bad for the tradition of the art form.
Right.
Really.
maybe as well, though, then that what your task as a teacher is to somehow invigorate or stimulate the audience to ask questions. Because it's almost like, but as soon as they start to ask questions, then it's a dialogue and they're kind of listening to you, even if they're disagreeing with you. Then it's a dialogue and there is a participation here. And that goes back like...
Yeah, the disagreement is not a problem.
No.
But I see now what is the problem. Because in the days when it started with us and we moved from circus to the school, the audition for the jugglers was run by you. And what happened was that suddenly they admitted students for juggling which you might not have admitted, and therefore the line was broken. And that was what happened. And I think if you again will be the admitter of students to juggling, there will come students that can hear what you say.
Yeah.
And what you can do is, of course, you can listen intensely to what they have, and you might then find a way to relieve yourself.
I have to tell you, but more Erik, something that I talked with Frodo about yesterday in terms of teaching, is he said a really great thing that helped relieved me of a lot of stress that I've been having about teaching when it doesn't go good, which is not all the time, but sometimes, right? And, Frodo made me realize that I'm growing all the time forward, as are you, as we all are, right? From where we are right now, we're different than we were 20 years ago. We're different than we were a year ago, even in terms of relationship to our teaching and what we think about. Because we're having all these dialogues intentionally now, recording them, having podcasts and stuff. So like we're really going in that direction, and not just even naturally or organically, but we also push our thoughts forward with each other. And but I keep meeting the first year students again and again. Like I keep meeting those people from the beginning where I keep going farther and farther ahead, not in a quantitative game like that, but you see what I mean. And I told Frodo, I kind of wish to meet, sure, we can meet the first year students every time as I keep growing older and older, but wouldn't it be nice to meet the 20-year students and the 30-year students? Do you see what I mean? So that you can have some sort of like easier reference of communication. I just keep growing farther and farther away from that first year student because Erik, me and you, we talk about this sometimes where it's like we frequently, it's very easy for us now to skip over the fundamentals, and we're frequently surprised at how far back the fundamentals feel to us. Like we'll come in and we'll start a conversation and we think we're starting the beginning of the conversation, and then in the end we realize, oh no, we skipped over the whole beginning. We have to drill it down farther, and that beginning feels farther and farther away from me, and I feel more and more disconnected from it. And so that's where it's like you say, yeah, you can have the student and you can kind of try to, even if I try to relate to them, that I'm as you have felt different periods in your life, Ivar, to relationship to your teaching and relationship to the periods of your life, this arc, this rhythm of, now I'm doing this kind of phase in my life, and now this phase in my life. I feel more and more disconnected and alienated from that beginning point to the point where I can't even maybe relate to it in a productive way anymore. That even if I want to help the first year student, I'm so far out of touch of what that means today that I can't even, engage that process. So I feel sometimes really stuck.
But I think it also has to do with, in terms of getting further and further away from that point, there also has to do with, sure, I have knowledge, like I know certain things, and just because I'm not engaging with things that I learned 20 years ago, I still know them. But there's only so much information and material in me that's somehow alive, that intrigues me, that I kind of have fights with, and that I feel stimulating. And sometimes I feel like that's also the only resource that I have in terms of sharing, because it's so hard to share that old stuff that I don't like. It's so hard to ask someone to care about something that you don't care for. If that makes sense.
Oh yes, it makes sense.
Yeah, that seems like an unreasonable demand somehow. So I can share what I'm passionate about and what I don't know, maybe I should be, passionate. Maybe it's just that I'm not fit for this teacher role. That could certainly be the answer to this. But I'm still open for some kind of future.
I think both these things, you're still stuck in the school concept, whereas Matisse was not. So his atelier was open for students that wanted to come and paint in his atelier. He admitted some, he did not admit some, because there was limited space and there couldn't come hundreds of them. Boys took thousands of them, but he didn't taught either. But if we stick to the meeting place idea instead of the school, so if Erik invites you to come, you can answer him, I can come and do my stuff in your atelier with the other students, and if they want to do something to show me, or if they want to see me do something, it's okay, but I will come and do my stuff.
Yeah. I call this point between the showman and the audience, the thing that emerges where the show happens, I call that the area of interest. You have 2 points on the line, the showman and the audience, and that's 180 degrees geometrically speaking. And when they meet each other so strongly in forming something new, it's like you get a new point. It's like this is where they are meeting. And if you then lift that off the line, as soon as you lift that off the line, even just a millimeter, it's now a triangle. And it goes from being a one-way street to being a place which has a space. The area emerges, but a triangle is also 180 degrees. So there's been a transformation of the space, but it's the same, it's still the same in a certain sense, it's the same thing, but the two are now becoming three because they are now genuinely meeting. And the emergence of this space I think of as the area of interest. And that can only happen if the right attention is paid by the giving of, because the relationship between an audience and a performer is also that the performer is supposed to give. But if I just stand there and go through the motions, there's nothing there. I need to catch them, their attention, attune it to interest, and then this point of connection goes to an area of interest. And when that happens, there is a dialogue, and in that space, all sorts of stuff is possible. And that triangle can be in any kind of shape, and it will still follow the Euclidean, not the triangle, but what's his name's triangle with where the sides are.
Pythagoras?
The Pythagoras' triangle, how the two small sides will always add up to the last third large one, and they then will be an understanding. And that's why that first step, and I don't have like this gets done like this or this gets done like that, but it paints at least a picture of going, the meeting place. When you're using that word, I'm going, this is exactly what it is, the meeting place. And to me, it comes to, I'm doing a lot of writing about the next thing I'm going to talk about, which is the origin of showmanship and what we do in play. And play emerges as a thing within evolution when, mainly like all mammals play. So something happens between parents and children where the parents allow the child to stay within an area which is free from evolution's drives. They don't have to get their own food, they don't have to look after their own safety and all this. And in this space, which some of the people who talk about play in a theoretical way, they call this a relaxed field. So you create a relaxed field where the child can now no longer needs to make their decisions based on rationality. They don't need to, and in this space, the most human things can flourish. Because you're not driven by the other things, because somebody who loves you unconditionally without expecting something in return is giving you this relaxed field, this area of interest, and within there you can become, like Schiller says, man is only truly, like the most truly human thing one can do is to play, and you can only, the most truly way you can be human is to play. And in that you kind of go this, when you take away all the restraints and you just do what comes from your own inner motivation, which is one of the characteristics. If it's not self-motivated, it isn't actually play. If the teacher goes, now we're going to play shop and we're going to learn about money, as soon as you say we're playing to learn, it's no longer play. Now it looks like play, but after a session like that with the kid where they're going, now we've played shop, the child will go, can we, when it's done, they go, can we play now? Because it wasn't play. You call it play teaching, you call it, but it's not the same. So it has to be motivated from the inner thing, and that can only emerge when you give them that relaxed field.
I mean, it's hilarious that you just said this idea of equating, because you started this, what you just said about teaching, and because my show thing really closely relates to yours, right? It's what you want to, I would say it's what the audience expects to see and what you want to show them. And it's how those two things meet, that's your show. Because if you actually want them to see what you're doing, you have to speak to them directly. And it's hilarious, I never thought to apply that to teaching. I mean, of course, so like what you're saying, Erik, it's, you know, it's like, hey, these students want to learn this thing, and like you said, you can only hold so much interest inside yourself at the same time. So you want to talk about this thing. And then I guess the good teaching is how those two things meet. And you know, what they expect they're going to get out of class today, and what you want to talk about in class today, it has to have a good combination there. And the thing is, I just generally don't, I have to say, probably, hadn't thought about this before really, I don't really have the interest or the patience or the energy to find that in the class. Though I do have it for doing shows, because in shows I kind of expect that's the deal. But in classroom I always had a different expectation on it, but it's the same thing. And so the question is, do you, Ivar, because you've been a great teacher in your life and are a great teacher, so do you have a passion for that meeting of what they think they're going to learn and what you want to tell them? I mean, isn't that the secret of passion in teaching? Or you have to love that part, you have to love that moment.
Yes, I do, I guess. I didn't formulate it like that.
Yeah.
But I mean, to me, the younger was always the bringer of the future. And when I started teaching 7-year-old kids. And it was totally so for me that I was there to learn from them what was going to happen tomorrow. And I mean, it is so with anyone younger than me is the carrier of the future. And I have to listen and watch. And I'm really outdated. I'm really outdated. I have nothing to teach to anyone these days, but I can listen still. And what I say in class, if I still do classes at the circus school or anywhere, is I don't have your language, you don't have mine. So when I talk to you, please tell me when you don't understand what I say or when it's not related to what you want to know. And of course they are polite, because I am such a nice guy, so they are polite, and I don't make them object or start to cry, even if I provoke, which I don't. But yes, I have a passion for this meeting. I have a passion for this meeting with anyone that wants to meet me. And also what I say when I am a guest teacher in some school or so, I say thank you for inviting me here. And they say, hey, we didn't invite you here. But I say, what happens is what you will shall happen. And as you are sitting here and I am here, this is what you will shall happen. And they relate to that. No problem. They understand immediately what I say. And that is the say yes to the situations generally. But I have a passion for that, I guess.
Okay. You said earlier that, you just recognize that the moment in life when the children are growing the most, they have to sit down for 6 hours a day.
Yeah.
You remember that?
Yeah.
Do you have any suggestion as an alternative, like what should school be than that? Have you explored any of those ideas or?
Oh yeah. When we started in the 60s, in the 60s it was, there was a big fuss around in Sweden because they closed schools in the countrysides and bussed kids into the central municipalities or cities or villages or whatever to get to school. And I thought it was so dumb because, of course, the buses should transport the urban kids out into the countryside schools because nature is a greater school than any school can be. But it didn't happen. Even if I shouted it out loud, also among politicians, yes, they nodded. That would be very intelligent and to do that, but they didn't do it. So this is first thing. Schools should not be in cities. Schools should be out in the countryside. That is first thing. And then much would happen out of itself. And we could unburden a lot of responsibility from teachers to what actually happens when it's spring, when it's winter, when it's autumn, etc., etc.
But that's true. The whole culture is leaning towards this fallacy of a teacher is there to give the student the learning that they need, as if they have all the answers, and maybe they do. But what we are coming towards here is this idea of being given answers that you haven't asked for. It's like telling them, now we're going to play that we live in a hotel, and now we're going to learn to whatever, that it isn't actually the real learning yet. And the original teacher that fostered Plato and Aristotle, two great directions within Western culture, Socrates, famously said he didn't know anything at all. He was at best a midwife that would bring forth ideas from other people. That was all he said. And you were saying that, and I was thinking that when you were describing it, because it's also something disarming of that. With the kids coming in, and when we're teaching circus students, it's often adolescents, and I have this feeling that you are never as sure that you know everything as when you're an adolescent, because then you already know everything, and everything is so black and white that you don't really need anyone to tell you. You can tell them, we're going to change the environment, we just have to do this, and it seems so easy, and then it turns out it was difficult. So maybe meeting them with this attitude of, I don't really know, and I am a little bit outdated, and I will say some things, and if it doesn't make any sense, that's also this invitation. It's a question or approach which is filled with invitation to engage them, because this idea that the teacher has all the answers and are given it, that means the same situation arises in a show where they go, I've just paid you €1,000, now entertain me, you better be funny because I paid all the money now, or whatever. This is a terrible situation for comedy, where they go, okay, now just make me laugh. Yeah, and it better be worth it. Yeah. And sometimes this happens, kind of like you have this transactional thing, and that happens in schools, like you said. You even going, okay, I realize I might be on. I didn't treat it like I need to invite them in, like in the show or whatever. Mm. So I don't know how to fix that, but this idea that the teacher somehow can push their information onto the kids is dead in the water, and and also I think generally in teaching, and that might apply to the circus teaching too, that you're trying to teach too much within, there's only 3 years, and you need to somehow limit it, because the more the schools grow, I think the only thing that a school can ever do is to put more stuff into the curriculum. There will no one that will go, so now when someone goes, oh, we need to talk about these social issues, and we need to bring gender into this, and we need to bring the environment into this, and we need to make this, and it's not like they're going to go, oh, now we've done with the environment, or now we've done with social equality, or now we've done with... So, and there will be more and more things that you try to get in, and you get more and more detailed and fractured knowledge squeezed in, that, okay, we're going to try to just cover the same amount of material, but we're going to just talk twice as fast.
Well, this goes back a little bit to this idea earlier about, what is the intent of the school? What's the intention? What's the common vision of the education? And Frodo said something the other day about this idea that, because, like you say, maybe you're trying to teach too much. You have 3 years. And how much responsibility do you have for that student's future? Erik, we've talked about that, right? And Frodo had said something where it was like, yeah, but I've seen these acts, or maybe, you were having this discussion, like, there's these acts that come out of school, and they're going to be hard. It's going to be hard to make money with that act for whatever reason. It's hard to rig, it's hard to travel, it's hard to sell. Who cares? It doesn't matter. It's hard to make a living with that act. You could make a better living with a different type of act. Maybe the school should be teaching that. And I just had a thought. That's I can really relate to what you say there, because I also often have the feeling of the students I work with, where I'm like, oh, when they graduate, I certainly hope they can go out into the world and do what they want to do with this, right? Which includes eating and paying rent and whatever. But is it the school's responsibility to make people make money with what they're doing in the school? And that's like a real question that I had assumed for years, but I don't know. Do you think what's the role of the school? Is it to take care of their future, or is it just to give them an experience that they can then go and do with what they want? Do you see what I mean?
Oh, totally. Yeah, I mean, I've thought about that so much myself. Like, where is that line where the responsibility kind of ends? And like, if you go to university and you teach mathematics, I think they just, I haven't done that course, but I think they just teach you math. They don't go and, like, here's a clever way to, write on the business card that you're a mathematician and pass it to, So I don't have an answer yet, but at some point, there's times where I just like, no, I just want to, it's just going to be a place where I teach circus or juggling, and that's it. But there's even if I stand on that foot, sometimes there's always also that pragmatic side of me that's tempted to be like, no, but if you just did this.
When we transferred from the pilots into the university system, it was a very important issue that we could prove that 80% of the circus pilots were professional artists earning their living on their work.
I didn't know that.
No, but it was.
Yeah.
It was.
Oh, yeah.
And we really had to show that, like that. And there were not so very many, so 80% was kind of...
But so that was some sort of concrete goal of the school then, that after this you would make...
That it was a question from the state,
I see,
from the taxpayers, that can you become a person who earns his living after having done this program? But then, when it comes to, we are now established, the fact is you have to be able to tell before people enter into your institutions what is given in your institution.
Yeah.
And if you tell in the beginning, before they enter, that here you can play with circus in many ways, and we do not grant you a living with good money for the rest of your life.
It's not a business course.
It's not a business course, not at all. Only it has to be clarity. There is so less clarity at all entrances everywhere When you come into any workplace, they don't tell you actually the conditions of the place. When you put your child into the school, they don't tell you the conditions that will happen with this child. When you start to work as teacher in this school, they don't tell you what are the conditions to be a teacher in this school. But then when you fail for their conditions, they abuse you for that. I mean, all those bad manners that are by entrances, they are undescribable. But no, it's not the obligation for a university, but it is an obligation for a 12-year school from 7 to 8 years old to make a professional citizen out of you. And that is an obligation, and which is not fulfilled at all. Mm-hmm. Time is wasted. And all these things that makes that universities and all have to integrate climate and gender and race and whatever shit into their everything they are doing, it is just because the school failed. That should have been cleared with adolescents and children. And now you are allowed to specialize in circus or maths or physics or medics or whatever without including that, but because you are already totally organized as for race, climate, and gender.
It's that all those things, to not respect all those things and not to see things as an ecology of interconnected things as from the 12 years of school, which is your general education. By the time you start to specialize, it's too late to bring those things up. That in the common formation of you as a person, that needs to happen at that point. Yeah. And the failing of that system around the world has its own important role to play in how these things, these genuine issues of today, not putting any issues down across the board because it's all important, but that if you don't share any common ground, which I think is a large trend, and social media and the fact that we're getting our own curated news feeds, and so we don't watch the same television programs for good or bad, but we're all within our own little silos of information, and that helps fracturing us up into different things, which ultimately leads to this idea of like alternative truths or whatever, that it's, I know you say that's true, but it's not actually, so you get a fracturing up of things, and which is the same within a school or within all of society. But it's still though, it is possible to connect together individuals as well. And often what I find is missing in this, it's like people think of individualism as not having to have any responsibilities for other people, but within the individual development or the individual thoughts of the individual, there always also needs to be a moral, ethical component that sees that as soon as you're stepping on anyone else, that freedom that you're asking for ceases to exist, and it becomes a form of domination or whatever, and that is one of those fundamental things that needs to come in the early education or formation of people or something.
Yeah, and therefore it's a good thing if kids could remain in the same group of kids as long as possible, because that's where it happens. That's where you learn that being yourself is that you are yourself within a circle of other selves, and they grant you freedom as you grant them freedom.
It's interesting because it's going on a bit in my daughter's class at the moment. They have some kids who are different than others. They're all different from each other, but some have additional help and because kids at that age, they're very interested in fairness. Things needs to be fair. Everybody needs to get the same amount of cake. Everybody needs to go and you look, oh, this is too much. We need to take something out or else the whole party will fall apart. But within the class, there is a very strong understanding that what's fair does not apply in the same way to this boy. And to this girl over here, it's a different story. That you have to sit on your chair like this and you get told off if you move. But he has a slightly different parameters. For it to be fair, he needs to be allowed to also lie sometimes on the floor for him to function in the classroom or whatever. And I thought, maybe it's just because of the nature of my schooling when I was that age, but I do get the feeling like that we didn't quite talk about those things. And to have that developed sense of fairness, that it's not everybody is getting the same, but that everybody is getting what's fair, and that fair is not necessarily being bound by the same rules. I think that's for somebody who is 10 years old to have grasped that kind of stuff within the school context is an interesting fact that sets you up well for meeting other people. And you get within a group and you quite quickly go, oh, this person needs this and this person needs that, and everybody exercises their freedom to the greatest extent when it's actually not equal.
It's the great failure of the social democracy all the world around, that equal meant same for everybody, not that everybody should have what she needs. And this failure has many catastrophes, of course, with it. But many young ones I meet are very open in this, as you say. When my granddaughter, who is 11, she's totally aware of the fact that she does not need what he needs. And it's absolutely okay that he gets it and I rest aside. And this is so important. Yeah.
There's a question I never asked you, Ivar.
Wow.
Yeah, I know.
This is the last one.
Yes. So you've been teaching your whole professional life, we can say, right?
Yeah.
And so you taught a lot before you ever came to the circus school.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So did your conception of what teaching is, or your teaching style, or your method, or what was needed, did that change significantly when you came to the circus school, or did you kind of find that your general teaching philosophy and style and methods just mapped onto the circus, and it was kind of not dependent on what you were teaching, but more just the teaching environment or the educational environment? Or can you speak to any of that?
I think that one of the main reasons that Tilde wanted us to come into the school was what she had met from me as a teacher in her high school years. So no, I did not change. Rather, I found it so interesting to be free to do what I really wanted to do at the circus school, because at the pilots there were absolutely no limitations as for that. Already in the university, when we came there were strange limitations, but they didn't apply them, so it didn't matter. We should all have had so and so many points in pedagogic.
Yeah, right.
But we never cared for that. We got half of it in a fortnight. So it was nothing. But yes, the main thing was this, what I said before. They know more than I about the future. I have to listen very carefully here, that they can come to their own. I don't know what their own is, so I have to listen in a way that they find their way to their own future. And that was already when the 7-year-olds in the 60s and up till now. It's the same.
All right, now, before I let you go, I just want to remind you that the reason that this podcast exists is to share a deep understanding of what showmanship can be. And the only reason why I do this is because I want people to think about these things, and I want to meet other people who want to think deeply about what we do as performers. And to be able to continue with that, my biggest challenge is to reach people. I do reach more people when I have famous artists on the show. That is absolutely the way that any other podcast grows, grabbing the fame of someone else and turning it up. But, I don't mind it not growing exponentially. But if you know one person that you think could be interested in some of these things, someone that might need it, someone that is in a situation where they might need to think a little bit deeper or to get some inspiration, then point them towards the podcast. I will be forever grateful. And until next time, take care of yourself and those you love, and I hope to see you along the way.